Find another table, Mom. This one's for important people only. The words came from my adopted daughter, Lila, slicing through the hum of conversation at the Grantham Room, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago. For a moment, the whole dining hall went silent before laughter erupted around the table. My son, Grant, laughed with them. Lila's husband, Evan, smiled, proud of the scene she was creating. Even my grandchildren giggled, unaware of the sting behind her words. I stood there, my hand resting on my cane, pretending not to notice the people at nearby tables turning to look. 30 years ago, I had adopted Lila when she was only 8. Skinny, scared, and clinging to the belief that she was unlovable. I gave her everything I could: a warm home, the best schools, and later, money to start her own boutique. 2 weeks ago, I had transferred $250,000 to help her open that store. And now, this was how she thanked me. If you are watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. My friend Dorothy sat at the corner of the table, her elegant face tight with disbelief. "Lila," she said softly, "that wasn't funny." Lila just smirked and waved her hand. "Relax, Dorothy. It's just a joke. Mom knows I'm kidding." But I wasn't laughing. I smiled faintly to keep my voice steady. A joke stops being funny when it comes at someone else's expense. The waiter appeared beside me, holding a black leather folder. "Here's your check, ma'am." "My check?" I asked. Evan leaned back in his chair, amused. "Didn't we tell you? You're paying tonight. It's family tradition." Lila lifted her glass. "You've always been so generous, Mom. It's what you do best." Ah, I opened the folder, and the numbers blurred for a second. $4,780. They had ordered the most expensive wines, appetizers, and desserts. I closed the folder slowly. "No," I said, my voice calm but final. "I won't be paying for this." The laughter died instantly. "What do you mean?" Lila's voice rose, sharp and defensive. "I mean," I said, meeting her eyes, "that generosity without respect isn't love. It's weakness. And I'm done pretending I don't see the difference." The room grew heavy with silence. Dorothy stood, placing her hand on my arm. "Let's go," she whispered. As we walked out, I didn't look back. Outside, the Chicago night wrapped around me like a promise, cool, clear, and honest. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the woman who paid to be loved. I was simply a mother who had decided to stop funding her own humiliation. The night wind in Chicago felt colder than usual. Though maybe it wasn't the weather, maybe it was the silence that followed humiliation. Dorothy drove us home without saying much. The city lights flickered through the windshield, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to defend my children's behavior. I was simply tired. When we reached my house, Dorothy parked in front of the gate. "You handled that with more grace than I would have," she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of experience and disappointment. "I'm not sure I handled anything," I replied. "I just walked away. Sometimes," she said, turning toward me. "Walking away is handling it." Inside, my home felt both comforting and painfully empty. The walls held years of memories, birthdays, laughter, Christmas mornings. But now, every photo frame seemed to stare back at me like a witness. I sat in the living room, staring at a watercolor painting I had finished last week. Soft lilies by a pond, peaceful and unbothered. I wished I could be like them. My phone buzzed on the table. One message after another flashed across the screen. Lila, how could you embarrass us like that? Grant. Mom, what was that scene for? You could have handled it privately. Evan. We had to pay after you stormed out. You should be ashamed. I turned the phone face down. The house was too quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every word from dinner replayed in my head: the laughter, the sneers, the entitlement. Somewhere along the line, my love had turned into a transaction. I had taught them that affection could be bought with checks and silence. And now, they were collecting the interest. The next morning, I met Dorothy for coffee at a small cafe downtown. She sat in her usual corner, elegant as ever in her cream-colored coat. You know, she began, when you stopped paying that bill last night, it wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. I looked down at my cup, the steam blurring my reflection. It didn't feel like dignity, Dorothy. It felt like losing everything I'd built. No, she said, reaching for my hand. You didn't lose. You finally stopped giving to people who don't value you. Her words stayed with me. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized something simple but terrifying. Maybe I had built my entire life around keeping my children comfortable, and in doing so, I had made myself disposable. That realization hurt more than any insult Lila could ever throw. But somewhere beneath the pain, a small ember began to glow, the first spark of resolve. The morning after my talk with Dorothy, the world looked the same: sunlight filtering through the blinds, the faint sound of birds, but something inside me had shifted. I moved slower, more deliberately, as if every small action was a quiet act of reclaiming control. I brewed my coffee, fed the cat, opened the curtains wide. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone immediately. When I finally did, there were 10 missed calls and a string of messages. Most came from Lila. We need to talk. You owe us an apology. Dad's furious. You embarrassed him in public. There was one from Grant, too. Colder and shorter. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're pushing everyone away. I set the phone down and walked into my garden. The hydrangeas were blooming beautifully this year. Soft shades of lavender and blue. I had planted them when Lila graduated college, hoping they'd remind her that beauty took patience and care. I wondered if she even remembered that day. By noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised to find both Lila and Grant standing there. Lila was dressed impeccably, as always, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her anger and exhaustion. Grant, in his business suit, looked uncomfortable but determined. Can we come in? Lila asked, her voice clipped. I nodded and led them into the living room. The air was thick, like the calm before a storm. Mom, Grant began. What happened at that restaurant was unnecessary. You made a scene. I raised my hand to stop him. No, Grant. What happened at that restaurant was 30 years of silence finally breaking. Lila crossed her arms. You've never acted like this before. Is Dorothy putting ideas in your head? This has nothing to do with Dorothy, I said. It has to do with respect. And I've decided I won't fund disrespect any longer. Grant frowned. So you're cutting us off financially? Yes, I said simply. No more loans. No more gifts. No more paying for dinners that come with insults. That's fail. Lila's jaw tightened. You'll regret this when you need us. I looked at her not with anger, but with sadness. If love depends on money, then I already lost you a long time ago. The silence that followed was sharp. Lila grabbed her purse and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Grant lingered for a moment, searching my face for something: remorse, weakness, maybe doubt. He found none. As the door clicked shut, I exhaled slowly. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 days passed before I heard from anyone again. The quiet should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. My phone stayed still on the kitchen counter like a sleeping snake, harmless until someone decided to wake it. I knew sooner or later they'd come calling again. They always did when the money ran out. But instead of a phone call, I received a visit. Dorothy showed up just after noon, her silver gray hair pinned neatly, her perfume soft and familiar. She looked tired, though she tried to hide it behind her usual poise. "May I come in?" she asked, holding a small envelope in her gloved hand. "Of course," I said, leading her to the sunroom. The light poured across the table, highlighting the trembling in her fingers. We sat for a while in silence. She took a slow breath before speaking. "May, I need to tell you something, and I'd rather you hear it from me." Her voice faltered slightly. That alone made my chest tighten. Dorothy Vale had never faltered in her life. "I've been diagnosed," she continued, "with stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The words hit like a stone thrown into still water, silent at first, then rippling through every part of me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "There must be a mistake." "I wish there were," she said, smiling faintly. "The doctors gave me less than a year." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Dorothy." She lifted a hand, stopping me. "I didn't come for sympathy. I came to settle my affairs." She placed the envelope on the table. "Inside is my will and a proposal." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were several documents from her attorney, neatly arranged, each one heavy with meaning. "I'm leaving my estate to you," she said simply. "All of it. But there's a condition." "One." I looked up, startled. "Dorothy, that's impossible." "It's already done," she interrupted gently. "But you must pass a test. For the next 6 months, you cannot give your children a single dollar. No gifts, no help, no excuses. If you succeed, everything becomes yours. If you fail, it all goes to charity." My heart pounded. "Why would you do this?" She smiled sadly. "Because you've spent your whole life paying for love, and I want you to learn what love looks like when it can't be bought." The sunlight shifted across the table, landing on the envelope between us. In that fragile silence, I realized she wasn't giving me money, she was giving me a mirror. That night, I couldn't sleep. Dorothy's words kept circling in my mind like echoes in an empty house. 6 months. No money. No excuses. It sounded simple, but after decades of being my family's safety net, it felt like asking me to breathe underwater. By morning, I had made my decision. I would do it not for the inheritance, but for my dignity. Dorothy had given me something far more valuable than her fortune. She had given me a reason to stop surrendering myself. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and began writing. Not checks this time, but boundaries. A list of them, clear and final. No loans. No investments in anyone's new idea. No paying for dinners, gifts, or vacations. No apologies for saying no. The list felt strange in my handwriting, like a confession. I pinned it to the refrigerator, a quiet promise to myself. 2 days later, my test began sooner than I expected. Lila called, her voice sugar-sweet but brittle. "Mom, I hate to ask, but the boutique had a slow opening month. Rent's due, and I'm a little short. Just a small loan. I'll pay you back next week." For years, that sentence had been my weakness. Just this once. But I heard Dorothy's voice in my head. "You can't buy love." "I'm sorry, Lila," I said calmly. "You'll need to find another way." There was a long silence, followed by a cold laugh. "Oh, so now you're punishing us? After everything you've done for strangers your whole life, you can't help your own daughter?" Her words burned, but I stayed firm. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm giving you a chance to stand on your own." She hung up without another word. The silence afterward felt heavier than the call itself. That evening, I received a message from Grant. "Mom, did you really refuse Lila? She told me you've changed. What's going on?" I replied with a single line. "I'm learning that love doesn't need a price tag." He didn't respond. I stepped outside to water the garden. The air was cool, the sky a gentle shade of gray. Somewhere inside me, fear and peace fought for space. I was terrified of losing them. My children, my family. But I was more terrified of losing myself again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to the empty yard. 6 months, Dorothy. I hope I'm strong enough." 3 weeks passed, and the distance between my children and me stretched wider each day. My phone, once buzzing with requests and demands, now sat in silence. At first, the quiet felt unbearable, like withdrawal from an old addiction. But soon, that stillness began to heal something inside me that I didn't even know was broken. Then one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the name flashing on the screen made my heart stop. Piper's school. "Mrs. Whitfield," the nurse said softly. "Your granddaughter fainted during gym class. She's stable now, but she asked us to call you instead of her parents." Within 30 minutes, I was at the school. Piper sat on the nurse's cot, pale and trembling. When she saw me, her lips quivered, and she whispered, "Grandma." I knelt beside her, brushing her hair away from her face. "What happened, sweetheart?" "She hasn't been eating well," the nurse explained gently. "She mentioned the family's been having some difficulties." My stomach twisted. I looked into Piper's tired eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in years: fear. "Come on," I said softly. "You're coming home with me tonight." We stopped at a diner on the way. She devoured a plate of pancakes as if she hadn't eaten in days. I tried not to cry. When she finally looked up, syrup smudged on her chin, she said quietly, "Mom and Dad fight all the time now. The store's losing money. She says it's your fault." "My fault?" I repeated. "She said if you hadn't cut her off, things would be fine." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, sweetheart. Things would only look fine. But pretending doesn't fix anything." That evening, I called Lila. Her tone was sharp from the first word. "What now?" "Piper's with me," I said firmly. "She fainted at school. She needs rest, and so do you. Come over tomorrow at 7. We're going to talk." "I don't need your lectures, Mother. Kenna. This isn't about you or me," I said evenly. "It's about your children." And she was silent for a long moment before muttering, "Fine, we'll come." After the call, I stood by the window, watching Piper sleep on the couch, her face finally peaceful. The walls of my home felt stronger somehow, as if the act of saying no had given them back their foundation. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel what had been missing for so long purpose. The next evening, just before 7, headlights swept across my driveway. I wiped my hands on a towel, steadied my breath, and opened the door. Lila stood there in a tailored coat, her expression taut and defensive. Evan followed behind, his tie slightly crooked, while Noah lingered a few steps back, his eyes wary. "Come in," I said, keeping my tone neutral. The dining table was already set: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread. It wasn't a grand feast, just a warm, honest meal. Piper, still a little pale, sat quietly beside me. The moment Lila saw her, her voice softened for the first time in months. "You scared me, honey." Piper looked down at her plate. "I'm fine, Mom." We ate mostly in silence until Lila finally slammed her fork down. "So, this is what you wanted? To make me feel guilty? To prove that you can take care of my kids better than I can?" "No," I said calmly. "I asked you here because your children are caught in the crossfire. They're suffering, and pretending otherwise helps no one." Evan cleared his throat. "The business has been struggling. The rent's too high, and the stock she ordered isn't selling. We're barely keeping up." Lila shot him a glare. "Don't make it sound like it's my fault, isn't it?" Noah blurted, his teenage voice cracking under anger. "Grandma gave you $250,000, and it's gone. You blame her, but you're the one who doesn't know how to manage anything." "Thanks for watching." Thanks feuded. "Enough," Lila snapped, eyes blazing. But the truth had already landed. Evan rubbed his temples. "He's right, Lila. We can't keep pretending." For the first time that evening, Lila looked small, not the confident woman in designer heels, but the lost little girl I'd once brought home from the orphanage. Her voice broke. "I tried, Mom. I really tried. But I don't know how to fix this." I reached across the table, my hands steady. "You don't need another check, Lila. You need guidance, discipline, not dependence. Let me help you rebuild. Not with money, but with knowledge." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't pull away. Evan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what we should have asked for all along." Outside, the city lights flickered through the windows, quiet and distant. For the first time in years, our table wasn't about money or power. It was about truth. And though fragile, it was a start. The following week marked a turning point. For the first time in years, Lila began visiting my house, not to ask for money, but to learn. She carried notebooks instead of receipts, questions instead of complaints. Each morning, after dropping the kids at school, she'd sit at my kitchen table while I showed her how to read a balance sheet, calculate profit margins, and plan inventory cycles. At first, she resisted. "I'm not good with numbers," she muttered one morning, scribbling in frustration. "You said the same thing about sewing when you were 12. I reminded her. "You learned then, and you'll learn now." Slowly, something shifted. She started asking better questions, staying longer. One afternoon, as we reviewed her boutique's expenses, she stared at the long list of luxury imports and whispered, "I was trying to impress people who never even came to the store." I smiled gently. "Then it's time to impress yourself instead." "Thank you, Verkin." We drafted a planned smaller shop, local suppliers, realistic rent. When she called her landlord to negotiate, her voice trembled. But she did it. I watched pride rise in her eyes afterward, cautious but real. Meanwhile, Noah and Piper thrived in the calm of my home. They helped me in the garden, cooked simple meals, and laughed again. Evan came by on weekends, offering to repaint Lila's new storefront himself. Even Grant, who had been distant, called one evening to say he'd paid back part of his old loan. "I guess you were right, Mom," he admitted. "Depending on you made me lazy." I smiled at the phone, feeling something rare, quiet satisfaction. Dorothy's test wasn't just reshaping me. It was reshaping all of us. Still, I missed her. Every time I looked at the envelope on my desk, her will and those impossible instructions, I thought of her voice, steady and wise. "You can't buy love, May, but you can teach it boundaries." One late afternoon, as Lila packed her things to leave, she paused at the door. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "why didn't you make me learn all this sooner?" "Because," I replied, "you were never ready to listen, and I was too afraid to let you fail." She nodded slowly, her eyes soft. "I'm listening now." After she left, I stood by the window, watching the first autumn leaves fall. The air felt lighter, almost forgiving. For the first time in decades, my home wasn't a bank. It was a classroom, and my family was finally learning again. Winter crept in quietly, coating Chicago in soft gray light. By then, 3 months of Dorothy's test had passed, and I was proud of how far we'd come. The boutique was smaller, but finally turning a modest profit. Lila no longer chased trends she couldn't afford. She chased purpose instead. Grant had stabilized his business, and my grandchildren filled my home with laughter again. But beneath the calm, I could feel something else stirring an unease I couldn't name. Dorothy's health was fading fast. Her voice, once commanding, now came weak through the phone. "May," she whispered one afternoon, "I think I've reached the end of my runway." "I'm coming to see you," I said, already grabbing my coat. At the hospital, the world felt suspended in quiet. Dorothy looked smaller, wrapped in white sheets, her silver hair resting gently on the pillow. Yet her eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes, were still sharp. "I heard about Lila," she said, smiling faintly. "You're doing beautifully. I'm just doing what you asked." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're doing what you should have done years ago, loving with limits." I took her frail hand in mine. "You shouldn't have to leave yet. There's still so much I owe you." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Then repay me by living with dignity. Promise me that." "I promise." A few days later, Dorothy passed in her sleep. Peacefully, without pain. I was there, holding her hand until the end. The morning light had barely broken when the nurse touched my shoulder and whispered, "She's gone, gone." The word echoed through the sterile room like a bell tolling somewhere far away. At the funeral, business leaders, city officials, and old friends filled the pews. But I barely noticed them. My eyes kept drifting to the casket, not with sorrow alone, but with gratitude. Dorothy had saved me long before she died. After the service, her attorney, Arthur Penn, approached. "Mrs. Whitfield, Dorothy requested that we meet next week for the official reading of her will. She wanted your entire family present." I hesitated. "My family? He nodded. Her words were specific, all of them. As I walked away, the wind carried a chill through the cemetery. Sharp, but clean. I knew whatever Dorothy had planned next wasn't just a farewell. It was the final lesson she meant for all of us to learn. A week later, my family and I gathered in the oak-paneled conference room of Arthur Penn and Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled Dorothy's affairs for decades. The air smelled faintly of leather and dust, and the winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows made everything seem sharper, colder. Lila sat beside Evan, her posture rigid, her hands fidgeting with her handbag. Grant arrived with his wife, trying to appear calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. Noah and Piper sat quietly near me, uncertain but curious. For the first time in years, we were all in the same room. Not out of obligation, but because of Dorothy. Arthur entered with a thick file, his face composed. "Mrs. Whitfield, everyone," he began. "Thank you for coming. Before we start, Dorothy requested that a video be played. She recorded it just days before she passed." He pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life. Dorothy appeared, frail but still regal, sitting by a window with sunlight behind her. "If you're watching this," she said, her voice gentle yet steady, "I have already left this world. But there are things I need to say before my affairs are settled." Leela shifted uncomfortably. "I spent my final months watching my dear friend May rebuild her dignity," Dorothy continued. "But I also watched how her family treated her. The mockery, the demands, the absence of respect. To the children and grandchildren in this room, know this: wealth without gratitude destroys everything it touches." Grant lowered his gaze. Lila's face turned pale. "The fortune I leave behind is not a gift," Dorothy said firmly. "It is a mirror. It will reveal who you are." Arthur paused the video and began reading. By the terms of Dorothy Vale's last will and testament, the entire estate, valued at approximately $1.9 billion, is left to Mrs. May Whitfield. Leela gasped. Evan blinked in disbelief. Arthur continued. "However, Mrs. Whitfield has been granted full discretion over several conditional trust funds established for her family." He turned to Lila. "For you, Mrs. Hart, a trust fund of $5 million, accessible only after 5 years of documented service at a nonprofit organization earning minimum wage. During this time, you are not to receive financial assistance from your mother." "What? That's insane!" Lila exclaimed. Causes. Arthur ignored the outburst. "Mr. Grant Whitfield, you are to receive a similar trust of $5 million, contingent on completing 3 years as a teacher at a public school in an underprivileged district." Grant swallowed hard but didn't argue. "As for the grandchildren, Noah and Piper, each will receive fully funded college scholarships and an educational trust, released upon turning 18, independent from parental control." Finally, Arthur turned to me. "Mrs. Whitfield, Dorothy left you not only her estate, but full authority to modify these conditions at your discretion." I stood slowly, feeling the weight of their stares. "The conditions remain," I said. "But if you both complete them with sincerity, not resentment, you will receive your inheritance and a portion of mine as well. If you contest or manipulate this, you will lose everything." The room went silent for a long moment. Then Lila whispered, "Mom, you wouldn't really hold us to that." "I will," I said softly. "Dorothy believed in consequences, and so do I." Months passed. To my surprise, both of them accepted. Lila joined a nonprofit that taught sewing to teenage girls from broken homes. At first, she struggled. The pay was small, the work exhausting, but her letters to me grew softer, humbler. Grant began teaching math and computer science at a public school on the South Side, finding joy in something no amount of money had ever given him: purpose. When my 70th birthday arrived, Noah and Piper surprised me with a photo album titled New Beginnings. On the last page, there was a note from Lila. "Thank you for forcing me to face myself. I used to think love meant being given everything. Now I know it means earning trust, respect, and forgiveness. Leave it." As the sun set over my garden that evening, I opened the window and let the cold air in. Dorothy's scarf, the one she'd given me before she died, hung on the chair beside me. "You were right," I whispered to the empty room. "You can't buy love, but you can build it one boundary at a time." And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, quietly rich.